Manitobans will join the rest of Canada in deciding who will be the next Prime Minister of the country. So far, the campaign trail has been a lot of debate and discussion about tariffs and crime, but what about the issues that haven't made the headlines? So things perhaps that have not been talked about enough. Our political panel is going to tackle those this week. We're going to talk about reconciliation, immigration, and climate change here on Earth Day. We are joined by our political panel to get those conversations started. So as I've been saying, and I have been every week, all of them are devoted Manitobans and political veterans. Via Zoom, Dan Vandal in his final days before he steps down as Liberal MP for St. Boniface St. Vital. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning.
And also via Zoom this morning, Erin Selby, former NDP MLA for Southdale here in Winnipeg. Hello, Erin.
Good morning.
Everyone switched places today. In studio live, I have Dorothy Dobbie with me, former Conservative MP for Winnipeg South and former Parliamentary Secretary. Good morning.
Good morning.
So just because we're inside 6 days, how are you feeling about your party right now as we push to the finish?
Well, I'm always nervous. I mean, it's the polls are very negative right now. I'm hoping we can pull a rabbit out of a hat. We'll see. The best I think we can hope for is a minority, but even that would be a good news story for me.
For the NDP, Erin, how are you feeling? Just 6 days to go here.
I think that Jagmeet Singh did really good in the French and the English debates, and I'm hoping that's going to pick up our numbers. I also think the best thing would be a Liberal minority, because we know what good work got done when NDP had a voice at the table.
And Dan Vandal, how are you? How are your thoughts?
I'm feeling cautiously optimistic. I think everyone's been impressed by Mark Carney, his calmness and his experience and his sense that he is the adult in the room that we need to deal with Donald Trump. So I'm cautiously optimistic, and I think we really need to finish strong.
Well, let's see if some of these issues that voters say should be discussed are going to be maybe a factor at the ballot box. When I asked on Facebook first thing this morning about what issues aren't being discussed, the first handful of comments coming in, and one of them was reconciliation. So why don't we begin there, actually? And why don't we begin in studio with you, Dorothy? Some Indigenous leaders also are saying reconciliation's taken a backseat in the election. What are your thoughts on that? What's your reaction?
Well, it may have taken a backseat in the election because there's so many other things on the table, but I have to say that we must continue to do the things we're doing. The one thing that Indigenous people need is opportunity, and they need us to open up those possibilities for them so that they're no longer marginalized. I'm particularly concerned with the folks that are up north that are stuck in remote reserves where they can't get out. There's no hope. There's no possibility. The schools aren't very good, and they need to have an economy that they can build for themselves.
How will your party do that?
Well, one of the things, as you know, you may know we're doing, and I'm very glad to hear Wab Canoe say this, we're trying to build a second port on Hudson Bay, and it would be owned by the Indigenous people, led by Fox Lake and some of the other folks up there. And they're so excited about it because they see the possibilities, the spin-offs that can happen from having that. Just having the access to the outside world for many of those remote communities is a game changer.
Erin Selby for the NDP, if you would speak to the questions. First, has reconciliation been missed in the conversation? And second, what would the NDP do?
I think you're right that perhaps we haven't been talking about it enough, but I know for the NDP, reconciliation means action. And I don't mean action like the Liberals have been doing by taking residential school survivors to court to try to fight what they deserve. I mean things like making sure that we have informed consent with anything that's happening with Indigenous people and with Indigenous nations. We still have boiled water advisories on some First Nations, and that is a Liberal promise from way back that hasn't been fulfilled yet. I think it would be important to do things like the NDP are promising, invest in clean water infrastructure. I mean, that's one of the starts. But also, we need to look at some bigger things like an inquiry into systematic racism in the justice system. So I think there's a lot of actions that we're talking about that will help everybody. Things like capping grocery prices, certainly in the north. That's a real difficulty in trying to pay for just basic groceries. But also just to make sure that informed consent and holding up the treaty obligations that we have right now is really important in terms of mending our relationship.
Dan Vandal, I'll let you respond, but also responding to what Erin said about your government and promising the boil water advisories. We still have them. Your Liberal government said that you get rid of them, and also the idea that residential school survivors are being taken to court by your party.
First of all, Indigenous issues and reconciliation have been not only a part of our party platform for 10 years. More importantly, they've been a part of our budget, where literally hundreds of billions of dollars have been invested with Indigenous nations for education, for housing, for health, for justice. We've removed 147 boil water advisories over the last 10 years. We've dealt with 3 years of COVID where everything, literally everything, was shut down. There are 30 more boil advisories to lift, and they all have plans and budgets to do just that as during our next mandate. So really, we have not been perfect on boiled water advisories, but 147 boiled water advisories lifted in 10 years is 147 more than Stephen Harper did in the previous 10.
I want to lean into ideology for a moment. How do you see the relationship between a federal government that would be conservative and Indigenous peoples, Dorothy?
I think really it's a question of giving them the opportunity to take control of their own lives. I was Parliamentary Secretary to Indian and Northern Affairs for several years, and I traveled all across the country and met with many, many people. Most of them they felt like servants.
Does that mean government-to-government relationships?
It means people-to-people relationships, and however we work it out between us. I have no problem with having whatever you call government. It scares people, but it doesn't scare me. It's about respect for each other, partnerships the way we had partnerships in the very beginning when there were trading relations that were equally valuable to each side, and respect for people and listening and paying attention and working things out together in partnership. That's what they want, and that's the respect they deserve.
Erin, is there a difference in ideology when you're hearing Dorothy talk about what the conservative approach would be to what an NDP government would, how that view would go of Indigenous people and First Nations?
I think we only have to look at the example of Manitoba and the relationship that we have here, and it's based on informed consent and making sure that it's not just the federal government that's making profit off of land and resources that are traditionally on Indigenous land, but to making sure that we're talking about informed consent, upholding treaties, and continuing forward with reconciliation.
And Dan Vandal, how do you view the ideology that the Liberal government?
Our relationship with Indigenous governments is nation to nation, is government to government. I've sat in meetings with the Prime Minister and all the ministers associated with Inuit leadership, with Métis leadership, with First Nation leadership, where we talked about the issues that were important to them and how we can move forward on them with the ministers and the Prime Minister in the room for half a day. That's never happened in Canadian history. So there's a lot of work to do. It's got to be followed up by investment and dollars. And let me talk about something very important locally, the Red River Métis Treaty, which we signed in November, but it still needs to be ratified by the House of Commons. That's a priority for the Liberal Party. And I can tell you, if Pierre Poilievre becomes Prime Minister, that treaty will die.
Do you want to respond to that, just because that's a big statement?
It's a big statement. It means nothing.
Well, will that treaty die if Pierre Poilievre...
I have absolutely no idea. It hasn't been discussed with him, but I know how we react to people. The folks, we try to react with respect and with person-to-person relationships.
We're being ambitious today, panel. I've got 2 more topics to get through in 4 minutes here, so let's move to immigration. Dan Vandal, we'll go to you first on this. Liberals say they'll maintain the cap on immigration. Well, actually, we'll outline this. Dorothy, the Conservatives have said they'd put a cap on asylum seekers. Erin, the NDP, said they'll assess whether there are enough resources to welcome newcomers. It's all coming from your leaders. So to each of you then, why is your party's platform better than the others? Dan, you can start here.
Well, I think we have to maintain the cap until the housing and the other support services can catch up. People forget that, again, I'll mention COVID, where the world economy and the Canadian economy shut down for 3 years. And upon its reopening, we were lobbied very hard for temporary foreign workers, and we accommodated business because the workers were needed. Now we need to wait and let the housing and other support services catch up to the levels of immigration. And we view immigration as nothing other than positive for the Canadian economy and provincial economies.
Erin?
Well, we certainly know that investments in housing have not kept up with the amount of people coming into Canada. But at the same time, we do need foreign workers. And certainly we saw that the Liberals put a cap right across the country with no thought into the fact that rural Manitoba still needs immigration. There are still places that need to have more people coming in. So it really has to be assessed. And that's why we're looking at a blue ribbon panel to properly review levels. And to not review levels right across the board of what works in Toronto necessarily works in Brandon, Manitoba. It has to be a region by region discussion, and also looking at what our labor market actually needs.
And Dorothy, to your leader's plan and the Conservative plan to put a cap, put a cap on asylum seekers.
Well, I think you're looking at a pause in the kind of levels of immigration that we've been allowing in without any kind of discrimination over the last number of years. We used to have a very good immigration system where we brought in people who would add value to the economy. We also had a family reconciliation system, which was great. But in the last number of years, it's just gone willy-nilly, and there's all sorts of possibility, all sorts of. I don't want to use the word undesirable, but I have to sort of say, yeah, there are a lot of people who got in who probably shouldn't be here. So we need a chance to stop, take a look, and see where we are going and how we should go. I agree that we need more people in the rural areas, but that's up to the rural areas to do what they can to attract people from the city, because there certainly is an overburden of folks who don't have enough places to live here, while there are empty houses in some of the rural areas in Manitoba. So there's a rebalancing that needs to happen, and so we just have to take it easy for a while.
Last question to each of you in our last minute here. It's Earth Day. Dorothy, how much of a lead should government take on combating climate change?
That's a loaded question. You can't leave that for 1 minute.
Well, you know what we can do? I'll tell you what. Are you free for the next 10 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So Dan, Erin, are you guys free for 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yes, I am.
Okay, excellent. Here's what we're going to do. This is, I'm glad you guys are all agreeing to do this live. We're going to actually keep talking through the 8 o'clock hour. And then the conversation about climate, period, and environment is going to be on Up to Speed. It's this afternoon. Why not? It's Earth Day. It's important, and you're quite right that slamming it into a minute's not enough. Thank you, guys. Stay here. Don't go, but thank you. Dorothy Dobbie, former Conservative MP for Winnipeg South, former Parliamentary Secretary Erin Selby, former NDP MLA for Southdale and Winnipeg, Dan Vandal up to until next week, Liberal MP for St. Boniface.